we're here, COP28. Are you optimistic about our future?
I'm optimistic in general. A lot of the power of human innovation is showing here and in all the work I do.
What does that mean? Does that mean that you measure success as in pledges? Do we measure success as trying to do better and putting more money where it should be?
Well, in the end, it's all about the human condition. More people are living longer. We've cut childhood death in half. Climate is this negative thing that's slowing down that progress. And so in mitigation, we want to make sure the temperature doesn't get too high. And then in adaptation, we want to make sure that the ill effects, that whatever we can't mitigate, that it doesn't reverse this incredible rate of human improvement.
But what are you most optimistic about? Is it business or is it actually leaders coming together with pledges?
Well, climate change, overall, it's a challenge to the world. Hydrocarbons have been very cheap. Our economy is built around, coal, gas, oil. And so we have to make this change. The progression of inventing new approaches, green approaches, and then implementing them, and over time scaling them and getting them so cheap, what I call zero green premium, you first have to have risk capital, then you have to have bigger amounts of capital, and eventually, as they say, trillions of dollars to get every country to replace its steel plants, its cement plants. And so depending on the emissions area, some of these things like steel and cement were at the very early stage. Some like electric cars, at least at the high end, the green premium you could say is zero. Not for low-cost cars where you park on the street, but so all these things, and the faster we go, the less temperature increase we'll see.
But do you think we're going fast enough to actually hit the targets that were set out in the Paris Agreement?
No, we won't hit
No
the
chance?
aspirational targets. Well, you can do the math on 1.5, and even 2.0 isn't that likely. Now, fortunately, if you stay below 3, a lot of the ill effects that people have heard about don't happen unless you really are irresponsible and let it get up to the higher range.
I mean, many people say it's innovation, but it's also with making sure that we don't waste energy in the things that we have now. How are we doing on that? Like, again, if you see all of the different components to trying to stick to the Paris Agreement, is there any low-hanging fruit that we should be thinking about?
Well, there's lots of things in energy efficiency, but that's primarily in rich countries where energy's been so cheap that we leave the lights on at night, we construct things where you have to drive long distances. Most of the emissions are coming from middle-income countries, and what they're doing to build roads and shelter is providing sort of the basic level that I think we'd all agree everyone should have access to. And so we can't get rid of that. We can have some efficiency. A good example of that is the current windows were never designed to avoid the heat leaking out. And so if you're willing to pay for this improved window, it's called Lux Wall, and there's others, then your heating bill goes down.
What about food and agriculture?
Well, food is fascinating because food is a source of emissions, particularly cows and rice and fertilizer. But also, the biggest negative effect of climate is that poor farmers who live near the equator, their crops are going to fail far more often, and that leads to malnutrition, which leads to vulnerability and way more deaths. And so we've got to innovate in agriculture, both to get rid of emissions, but also just so these farmers can have food and continue to have their life expectancy go up.
But are you it's never in a communique. Are you disappointed that it's never quite the focus of a COP, that food isn't?
Well, this COP did a better job on both food and health than previous COPs. You know, on the first day we had a lot of announcements to the commitments to the group that does better seeds called the CG system. You know, they should be famous because in the 1970s, when Asia thought their population growth would create widespread starvation, it was this CG system with better seeds for wheat and rice and corn that avoided that starvation. Now we need to reactivate that system, include a lot more crops, and so we saw commitments to that CG system. That was a first for a climate event.
Now, you've supported a lot of innovative companies with new technologies. Are you optimistic that you're getting extra funds, enough funds of people interested to reach critical mass?
Absolutely. So it was in 2015 I committed, with the Paris Agreement, I committed to create Breakthrough Energy and have high-risk capital for these companies with wild ideas to how to make meat, steel, cement, and that's gone very well. We have over 100 companies now. Here at this COP, over 30 of them had these booths where they could talk about their work. And the reason for that is for them to find partners. You know, these are small companies working at small scale, and so partnering up with big companies all over the world, that's one of the biggest pieces of progress that took place at this COP, because we had more of the big companies came. You know, that's why the attendance was so high. But those side discussions where people look at the little company and say, wow, you can do that, we'll help you make it big, make it cheaper. So I'm thrilled that this Breakthrough Energy team and those entrepreneurs will be key to solving climate change.
But how many of these small companies need to be in developing nations to really also, you know, become critical? And is it difficult to get the flows, the capital to these smaller companies?
So a lot of the innovators are in the high-income countries, even though they might have been born all over the world, the US, Europe. They need to partner with companies in what I call the middle-income countries, you know, India, China, Brazil. That's where 2/3 of the emissions are those middle-income countries. So the rich countries, not only do we need to get our emissions to zeros, but we need to be involved in the innovation, in the learning curve, so that when we say to India, hey, please change your cement, they don't come back and say, but that's way more expensive, you should pay for it, and we'll get into a deadlock and we won't get rid of those emissions.
And that's happening?
Yes. So the startup cement companies are now meeting with the big cement companies and seeing, okay, at least in the lab, it looks like you can make cement without emissions, and that over time, if you refine all these things, it will be the same cost. And so, yeah, those are the meetings that I'm most thrilled about. It's when the big companies look at it and say, this might work.
Where do you see the role of fossil fuels going forward?
Well, we have to outcompete fossil fuels. Now, to do that properly, they shouldn't get subsidies, and in fact, a carbon tax over time should be put on so that the new, say the electric car or the plane that use hydrogen, the fact it doesn't emit carbon, you're helping it get adoption. Those companies have skills, if you want to sequester carbon or, nuclear waste, or there's a lot of skills. If you want to make biofuels, some of those companies will take the capital and skills they have. So I wouldn't, say, okay, I wish they weren't there. People still, there's no country that can say, okay, we have zero emissions. People want to drive to work. In fact, the excess supply, when Russia cut off its supply, the world was sort of glad that was available. And so, yes, oil and gas needs to be outcompeted, and those companies need to join the effort.
I know you look at a lot of technologies and a lot of innovation, but is there one thing that you've been most excited about in the past 5 years, or that you're most excited about for the future? I know we talk about nuclear fuel. We talk a lot about the really big, exciting stuff. What are you excited about?
Well, I love all my children, and I have these 100 companies, and I never knew that we'd get a new way to make steel or cement or beef. It's fair to say that if we can get either nuclear fission or fusion to be safe and broadly accepted and very economic, because it's not weather dependent, it would be very complementary to the large amount of solar and wind that we're putting into our electric system. And so I'm biased. I'm a huge investor in both fission and fusion, and hoping that it comes in time. We can't count on it. Fission, it has been too expensive, and fusion doesn't exist yet.
But fusion, 15 years from now, like what's your? I know it's a guess at the moment. But
well, of the 4 companies I'm invested in, one of them, Commonwealth Fusion, has a credible path. Things will have to go well. That in the late 2030s, they'd be making electricity and start to scale it up. So that's an aspiration, but it's a great company, and we have 3 others that aren't quite that early, but are within 5 to 10 years of that.
We're in a strange place in the planet right now, because there's a lot of unknowns. It's AI, it's technology, it's of course climate change. Do you find leaders distracted, or are they still putting climate change as some of their top priorities?
Well, we can't have as our only priority. We still need to buy vaccines and bed nets, and when there's a war, that properly demands attention, and even the aid budget, for those refugees and everything. It is, I wish there hadn't been a pandemic or Ukraine war or Middle East unrest. Those are going to take away from the amount of tension we have on continuing to make health progress and climate change. So, those are bad developments. If you'd only seen 10,000 people come, versus 35,000 last time, you might have said, wow, we are really getting distracted. Instead, twice as many came here, including a lot of the big businesses. So the signs I'm seeing are that while we still have to deal with those things, and we have limited resources, so we have to spend them well, that climate progress is moving ahead, even though we won't meet our highest aspiration.
Bill Gates, one final question on AI. How does that fit into your vision for?
Well, AI is such a powerful technology, and this recent advance where the AI can basically read and write, that's going to affect every human activity. And so we're using AI to find new drugs. We're using AI to look at climate change. And so all of our companies are going to move faster because AI helps them explore different solutions and move a lot better. So, certainly for challenges like this, AI is very much our friend.
Bill Gates, thank you so much.